Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on social outcomes in regenerative agriculture programs. My name is Kelly Murray Young. I'm the Senior Director of Education and Inclusion at Field to Market, the Alliance for Sustainable Agriculture. In a few moments, I will introduce our speakers for today's discussion. However, before we begin, I want to quickly start with our antitrust policy. Please take a moment to read this statement. And I also wanted to share just a few quick webinar logistics. This webinar is being recorded. Everyone is muted and your video is turned off. We'll have a question and answer at the end of the presentation, so please enter your questions in the Q&A box on your screen, and we'll get to them at the end. So first, tell you a little bit about Field to Market. We bring together our members to collectively define, measure, and advance the sustainability of food, feed, fiber, and field production in the United States. We define sustainability as meeting the needs of the present while improving the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And as we all know, there are three main components to sustainability: planet, profit, and people. Currently, we have over 190 members whose logos you can see here on the screen. And those members are split across 5 membership sectors: the grower, civil society, an affiliate, which includes universities, agribusiness, and brands and retail. Field to Market has always been rooted in environmental sustainability. Our membership collectively agreed on the environmental indicators that are most important to measure in our supply chain projects. Using the best accessible models, we have developed a framework to assess 8 indicators at the field level. These are biodiversity, energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, irrigated water use, land use, soil conservation, soil carbon, and water quality. You can learn about these metrics on our website, www.fieldtomarket.org. So how do we measure these 8 environmental metrics? Farmers can measure their sustainability performance through our tool called the FieldPrint platform. And it provides a field level assessment of how management practices affect those environmental indicators. On the left of the slide, you'll see the screenshots of the online version of the FieldPrint platform. This is available for free. It's totally confidential, and anyone can log on and to use it today. We also offer an application programming interface to ag tech companies and other software providers. This allows them to use our industry-accepted sustainability metrics in their own tools. The idea is that whenever farmers are ready, wherever they're already turning for their agronomic insights, now they can see the sustainability analysis in that same tool. On the right side, you'll see our 9 current data partners, which include tools like Nutrien's AgriBull, John Deere's Operations Center, and Truterra's Insight Engine. What really makes Field to Market unique is that our approach is quantitative and it's grounded in science. We prioritize an outcomes-based approach, as we are not a checklist of practices. We'll never tell farmers how to farm. We say that we're technology neutral, so we have no preference whether a farmer's management is conventional, organic, or anything else. Rather, we meet farmers and the value chain where they're at today and help them find opportunities for continuous improvement. Now, touching on the profit piece of sustainability, we understand that financial constraints can pose a significant barrier for farmers who want to adopt those sustainable and regenerative agronomic practices. So in 2022, our Innovative Finance Work Group published a report to equip the value chain with financial innovations to support farmers in the risk and reward of adopting those practices. You can download the report from our website using the QR code on the screen. In that report, we share 12 blueprints for how companies across the supply chain can harness different financial mechanisms to support farmers. It shares concrete strategies for overcoming key barriers to farmer adoption and addressing the agronomic and financial risk farmers face in transitioning to the practices necessary for a more resilient ag system. These 12 blueprints are divided into 5 areas shown on the slide. And then branching into the people aspect of sustainability, In March of 2022, Field to Market members participated in a diversity strategic planning session to identify the steps that we should take to build a more equitable and inclusive commodity crop supply chain system. So we're committed to doing what we can to build trust between BIPOC producers and the agricultural supply chain, exploring social metrics of sustainability in our projects, assessing and correcting our own implicit biases, and bringing our members together to share lessons on the best ways to support our BIPOC colleagues. So part of that effort includes this webinar. We're thrilled to be joined here today by our colleagues at Forum for the Future, and they'll be sharing a tool that they recently developed on measuring the social outcomes for regenerative agriculture. So please help me welcome Natasha Mehta and Michelle Stearn, sustainability strategists. They're going to share their tool with you. So welcome, Natasha and Michelle.
Thank you, Kelly. And it's good to imagine you all here. I can't see you, but I know that you're here and listening. So thank you for coming. I'm excited to share with you some work that we have been progressing at Forum for the Future for the past 3 years. But I'll tell you a little bit about the background of what Forum does, and then I'll share a little bit of the work that we do as part of our Growing Our Future initiative, and then I'll pass it to Natasha to really dive into the toolkit on social outcomes in regenerative agriculture programs. And then we'll wrap up with a Q&A at the end. So just a little bit about the initiative. So Growing Our Future is a collaboration of participants who are working together to really change and transform the agriculture system in the United States to one that is both just and regenerative. And Growing Our Future is an initiative that was launched by Forum for the Future, which is an international sustainability nonprofit. We're working in 4 different geographies, but in the US, we really focus on food system transformation as well as transforming the purpose of business in sustainability. Next slide, please. So if you're here, you likely already know that agriculture sort of sits at the crux of some of the most pressing social and environmental challenges across the globe. It's a vital system that sustains us. But in the US, our agriculture system contributes to, I think the newest data point is 11.2% of greenhouse gas emissions. The Forum approach and using a systems change lens requires us to look at how these challenges intersect with other areas such as health, and acknowledging that our system is also plagued with deeply rooted inequities. And so we believe that really embedded in these challenges is actually an opportunity where agriculture holds the key to a really massive transformation that can begin to shift some of these challenges all at once simultaneously. But we believe that we've got to work together in concentrated action to start to see some of the shifts in the system. So realizing that, thank you, Natasha, for the next slide. So realizing that these challenges are so interlinked and that there's a lot of momentum also around regenerative approaches, especially in the past few years, we launched the Growing Our Future initiative in 2020. We started, these are just a few of the highlights on the timeline of the initiative. We started with what we call a landscape assessment, which really worked to start building momentum and trust and community with a network that has now grown to over 140 organizations. But in 2020, when we launched the initiative, we really wanted to start to take a unified and collaborative approach to addressing some of the challenges in the agriculture sector. So we garnered input from over 90 organizations to really understand what are the key leverage points that are going to shift the system, where if we take concrete action, we can start to actually shift the goals of the system itself. So that's kind of a key defining factor of the initiative. We're looking at taking a systems change approach to thinking about how can we change our mindsets from extractive mindsets that focus on yield and focus more on extraction from not just the land, but also communities, really shifting towards a system that regenerates, nourishes, and replenishes the land, as well as the people who care for it. So with these really big objectives, we've launched 4 different work streams, which are listed here on the right of this slide, that emerged from that collective diagnosis. And those work streams are financing the transition, shifting policy, exploring social outcomes, specifically in standards and certifications, and finally cultivating pathways to market for products that were produced regeneratively. So the social outcomes work stream is what Natasha is going to tell you about. She leads that work stream, and through that work, we'll share with you a little bit of the process of how we go about making those shifts. And in the effort to coalesce some of the insights that each of these work streams has built over the past 2 years, we launched 4 different toolkits to transform our agriculture system this May. Each of them builds off of the momentum and the collaboration, the ideas that emerge from each of the work streams, with actors from the private sector all the way to coalitions and corporations, grassroots community groups, policymakers, you name it. And so one of them is what Natasha is going to talk to you about today. If you're interested, of course, I think that's my cue to pass it to you, Natasha. Apologies if you can hear my.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, so as Michelle mentioned, I'm going to focus on the social outcomes toolkit that we developed. This toolkit really aims to answer the question of how we might incentivize equity, justice, and thriving farm communities alongside environmental outcomes in regenerative agriculture. You know, we've seen the rapid proliferation of standards, verification programs such as Field to Market, and they wanted to explore how these programs might play a role in incentivizing social outcomes as well. Throughout this process, we really wanted to center the visions and perspectives of farm communities to push our thinking beyond the minimum expectation of compliance and risk mitigation, and explore how their visions of regenerative agriculture could translate into measurable indicators. We started with a benchmark of existing standards that was published in a report in June 2022. So there might be some data points that have shifted since then. We looked at existing certifications and verification programs to understand how they were including social criteria. And what we found is that in some cases, there's no criteria related to social impact. In most cases, farmer-centered practices are named as an important component of regenerative ag, but we rarely see it included in the evaluation criteria. More so, when we do see it, it's often focused on adherence to laws and compliance, rather than, say, ensuring farmer health is thriving alongside social health, or alongside soil health. So what we really wanted to do is to really focus on the outcomes that farm communities want to see, and use that as a starting point for how they might translate into criteria and indicators for measurement. Our process included workshops with some community partners like Rural Coalition. We conducted interviews with producers and farm community representatives, and also looked at what is already out there. So we are not being duplicative of existing work, but trying to find spots of inspiration and references for how other progressive standards might be approaching this. Before we dive in, I just want to highlight some limitations of this work, as there is with all research. Just to say that this is we imagine this to be a starter kit for regenerative agriculture standards. It provides, an initial guidance on how we could start to create social standards based in outcomes, but it's definitely something that needs to be explored and built out, and is no means exhaustive. And we really recommend that this criteria be built and tested and further validated in collaboration with farm communities, ensuring that they're appropriate for their context. The second piece is that along the way in this research, we've heard quite clearly that there is a very real lack of trust in certifications, in metrics, or market-based incentives. There's I guess, skepticism that these methods can even ensure an equitable agricultural system, particularly among small acreage farmers and those who have been historically underserved by the U.S. agricultural system. So we want to acknowledge that social metrics are one of many pathways, but they will only take us so far if we don't also ensure standards as a whole are implemented in equitable ways. This includes sharing the cost of compliance, so making sure that adhering to new standards and frameworks don't result in a disproportionate burden on small acreage farms. Proactively reaching out to historically underserved producers, addressing historical harm, providing technical assistance, support, and financing mechanisms to ensure adoption, and also reducing the reporting burden. So many small acreage farms have reported that the burden of meeting reporting requirements is often a barrier to implementation. So if there are ways to leverage existing data, surveys, and reports, finding ways to do that to make it as seamless as possible. So I'm going to dive into the anatomy of the toolkit now. There is a lot of content, so I definitely invite you to explore the toolkit on your own time, hoping that this is kind of a taster and orientation of what's inside. So to get into it, it's built around 3 buckets of criteria, generally framed around spheres of impact. I'm going to go into the detail of all of them on subsequent slides. So the first bucket or so is around fundamental rights for workers. This includes things like living wages, benefits, health and safety protocols, and good working conditions. The second sphere of impact is at the farm level, so ensuring positive economic and health outcomes for farmers, ensuring that there's secure land tenure and that there's greater accountability from buyers. And finally, at what is probably the most named by producers is that a just and regenerative agriculture system should be one that delivers benefits to the immediate community. Regenerative farms aren't ones that just plant cover crops, but should be ones that enrich the people around them, improve community health, and make them more resilient. I'm going to talk about the first one, which is fundamental rights. I know I've set this up as kind of going beyond the baseline of compliance, but I don't want to presume that this baseline is even being met today. The ones that immediately came out from our conversations with producers are the ones in this table. So things like living wages, access to safe water and food, following health and safety protocols, and providing good working conditions. This criteria is mostly covered in some existing frameworks, such as regenerative organic, and side platform. So we didn't want to spend too much time or effort building this out, but just want to acknowledge that this is the critical baseline and something we want to think beyond, but also don't want to presume that this baseline is being met. So the second sphere of impact is at the farm level, what we call ensuring secure, resilient, and thriving farms. What we heard from producers is that their visions for a just agriculture system is one in which they can grow their own food, afford to get kids in extracurricular activities, keep and pass their farms on to the next generation. We had one producer say, I just want to see farming. I want others to perceive farming as a good job. In short, producers want to experience positive economic and health outcomes enabled by their own farms. So the way we've kind of bucketed this out is positive economic outcomes, positive health outcomes, greater accountability, and secure land. So you'll see in the toolkit, the way we've kind of framed this is in the first column having the outcome, a bit of rationale, and then starting to brainstorm indicators for how we might start to measure against these outcomes. And then where possible, have also included references of where some of these indicators might exist in existing frameworks. So for example, ensuring positive economic outcomes for producers. The folks we interviewed want to ensure that they're thriving economically and that farming is perceived as a safe, good job. So ways in which we might measure that include, are we seeing an increased share of profits going to farmers from food costs? Are we seeing improved educational outcomes of their children? Or if they want to just see children in extracurricular activities, are we seeing outcomes related to that? So really thinking about centering the producer in these outcomes and what folks on farms might want to see as indicators. For example, secure land tenure, we have, are we seeing overall an increase in secure land tenure among historically underserved populations, increased support for heirs' property rights among buyers? And then talking about health outcomes, ways we could measure that are just to actually measure outcomes among producers. So things like asthma, heart disease came up as health problems among farm communities. So how are we measuring against a baseline of those health outcomes? And finally, a big one was seeing greater accountability from buyers. We heard that buyers should have a responsibility to farmers that prioritize fairness, long-term relationships, collaboration, and trust with producers and suppliers. So in a kind of a mix of an outcomes-based approach and also practice-based approach, are we seeing reported increased trust? Are we seeing that farmers can access multiple buyers? In many cases, contracts limit things like that. And then also, are we seeing better buyer practices? So a supplier diversification policy and a commitment to sourcing from historically underserved producers, engagement in fair and long-term contracts, and increased transparency communication. I apologize if this is a bit dry, but I'm going to assume that you all are here because you are interested in these metrics and how we can really start to frame up indicators against things that we know are so important in this field, but haven't had the framework to talk about it or measure against it yet. So yeah, as you get into the toolkit, you'll see that there are tables. It's all kind of brought together in this table of how we might ensure secure, resilient, and thriving farms. Getting into the third bucket, this is, I think, the trickiest one, but the most critical. What we heard resonantly is that a just and regenerative agriculture system should be one that delivers benefits to the immediate community. Producers named that they want to see food they grow to directly increase access to healthy food in their community, and they want the farms that grow it on to create positive impact through engagement with the community. I think we all know that regenerative farms should be enriching the people around them, improving community health, and making them more resilient. It's something that resonates with most practitioners of regenerative agriculture and local food movements, but somehow it proves to be challenging through the lens of existing measurement and verification methods. And I want to acknowledge that there are very few examples of how to directly attribute one farm's actions with wider community outcomes. Yet this is the critical outcome that farm communities want to see. So this always seems to invite questions about methodological feasibility, and perhaps it's not appropriate to provide direct attribution, but I think this does shed light on a gap in existing approaches and provides an opportunity to develop new program practices. Perhaps there's an opportunity for brands and programs to develop new methodologies for community engagement and accountability, finding ways to integrate and invest in existing data reporting mechanisms. For example, if we wanted to measure how economic outcomes are improving in a community, can we use existing federal surveys or the EPA's Climate Vulnerability Index to assess how those things are improving over time, or measuring whether food costs have reduced in a community, or whether those farms themselves are serving their communities or selling more in their communities. If we wanted to seek improvements in community public health, can we measure the increased nutritional value of food in the community or a decrease in child hunger? And finally, this last bit about strengthened community relations and interactions. This is something that came up a lot, like wanting to see the farms actually engage and have events on farms or providing culturally relevant food and contributing to the resilience and community building. And I think there are opportunities for buyers to play a role in this as well. So providing investments for emergency and climate adaptation, and ensuring that there's increased investment in the regions where the farms are. So all of this is kind of, as I said, like an initial framework for what it might look like to explore and measure social outcomes alongside environmental ones in regenerative agriculture. But of course, we certainly don't want the work to stop here. And I will pass it to Michelle to share what's next and how you all might be able to get involved.
Sure. Thank you so much, Natasha. And just to echo something that Kelly has put in the chat, we really want to hear your questions. And so looks like we'll have a good chunk of time to discuss your reactions to this and hear what questions you have to both Natasha and myself, and also to Kelly. But we just wanted to let you know a little bit about what's happening in the broader Growing Our Future initiative and how this work sort of fits into the initiative itself. And we'd like to start by just welcoming you to participate in any way that would benefit your organization. There are sort of 3 layers of ways you can get involved if any of this content resonated with you. We invite you to join our overall community platform, which is sort of the container for all of this work. And we work on a national level, but we have people in our network from all corners of the US, really to help create those enabling conditions for change and building off of our design principles of fostering connectivity across the disparate corners of the agriculture system, and working to shift mindsets while addressing power and equity, as well as really centering the work of farming and ranching communities and agricultural communities, as we've tried to do with this toolkit, but we are definitely on a constant learning journey. So some highlights from this year and what you can expect from us: we do host system-wide convenings or workshops. So next year we'll be hosting at least 2 of those. And we are also forming an advisory committee to help us really walk the walk and listen to our community members in a more formal way to steer the direction of the initiative. So if those are at all of interest to you, we'll share our contact information. Sort of one level down from that, and way you can get involved is contributing to one of our work streams, whether it's the social outcomes work stream, or if you're interested in sort of the intersections among the different work that we do, from policy to finance to marketplace innovations. That's a really good way to get involved. You can get in touch with me to plug into that work. And then sort of the final level that I'll talk about is a push that we've heard from our communities in thinking about what's next for all of this work. We really want to see what these insights and ideas will look like in the context of specific regions and food sheds. So supporting the testing, quote unquote, of some of the social outcomes criteria that was developed under the leadership of Natasha. We're looking to work on some activations at the landscape level. And so if there's a question or exploration that you really want to dive into with us, we're all ears for that. I wanted to share a quote from a community representative that really kind of demonstrates the need for that final layer, which is we need to have a very intimate dialogue or pilot project to make sure that regenerative agriculture programs understand and develop standards in a way that incorporates them into the broader system. So we need to understand what their existing criteria is and develop criteria jointly. And that's really what is grounding our purpose in this next phase of work, and really keeps us motivated to forming new partnerships. So working closely with Field to Market and your members, Kelly, on what would it look like for this toolkit to really come to life. So we are, of course, welcoming feedback. And if you want to have a conversation about any of this, we'd love to meet with you separately. But for now, I'll pass it to you, Kelly, to close us out and open us up for Q&A if there are any questions.
Thank you both so much, Natasha and Michelle. This is really, really informative. As you know, Field to Market is very interested in pursuing social metrics in our supply chain projects. And so we're just beginning to explore those, right? What do they look like? And 2 weeks ago, we heard from Freeman Arrows Foundation about social mass balance as one approach. And so how do you see us integrating some of these social metrics into Field to Market programming? Like how do you see that working, and what would a partnership look like around that and with our other members as well? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, it would be wonderful to bring it to the standards committee and kind of start to think about what whether it is integrating into the field print platform or just embedding it more into the principles of Field to Market. I think it would be great to collaborate with, members from different sectors in order to build that up.
Yeah. We have a question from one of the participants asking if you have any specific recommendations to provide opportunities for smallholder farmers to foster regenerative agriculture. Any thoughts about how we can support those small acreage growers?
Sure, I can take that one, but Natasha, if you have any ideas, or Kelly too, please come on board. I think this is the key question that kind of guides our work in a sense. So thank you, Teresa, or I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. But I think a couple of things come to mind, and of course, we could probably talk for hours about this. But I would recommend, we've been working closely with the National Association of Conservation Districts to really think about the role of soil and water conservation districts in helping producers, especially those who identify as socially disadvantaged, which is a category that was incorporated into the Farm Bill, and NRCS, the National Resource and Conservation Service. Excuse me, that's a tongue twister. Yeah, so to think about what are the financial incentives that can help small acreage farmers incorporate new practices. And so I think we've worked a lot on identifying some of the barriers for smaller acreage farmers to access those incentives. And I'm seeing a lot of interesting approaches in this year's Farm Bill. Of course, we can always do more. We need more advocacy there. But there's been a lot of stipulations such as set-asides, gosh, I can just ramble about this for a while, but one more thing that I would mention is probably within RMA, the Risk Management Agency within USDA, there are some interesting programs to expand crop insurance to smaller producers, such as the microloan program. And we're working in our policy work stream to start to identify those and how we can really show up and advocate for them and advocate for more investment in those financial incentives. And I'm only touching on the USDA ones. There's also, of course, from the private sector, some opportunities. But yeah, I would love to talk to you offline if that's okay. I don't want to take too much time on that question. Anything from you, Kelly, from your point of view on that question?
I think probably finding them, right, and listening to them and offering financial support are probably some big ways. We know that, you know, not having a farm number and whatnot can be difficult for some folks that don't have, you know, a recognized farm like that to participate in programs. So that kind of support. You know, you also mentioned about reducing the record keeping burden as something. Any thoughts on how we can help with that, right? It's you mentioned looking at reports and already established data, and we do hear time and again that farmers don't go into farming to sit behind a computer. They do it because they want to work the land and, you know, produce the things that we need. So are any thoughts, did any of your stakeholders suggest some other ways that we can really help with that, right? I mean, there is some record keeping that has to be done for participation. Any thoughts on that, or any insights from your folks?
Yeah, I think it was a big concern that came up whenever you talk about bringing in a new standard or a new framework. So I think the recommendation was to provide as many opportunities to get shared, you know, for organizations like Field to Market and Side Platform to communicate with each other and allow farms to get joint certification or joint verification. And also to leverage existing data or existing reporting mechanisms, things that farmers and ranchers are already having to do. And then finally providing that technical assistance. So I think Kelly talked about proactive outreach. I think recognizing where that might be a barrier and proactively providing assistance to maybe help with the reporting aspects, or just providing the tools and support to make it easier.
That's wonderful. We have another question. Let me work through it here. So this has to do with the philanthropy community. So it's along with changing the consumer market standards, does Growing Our Future have any guidance or thoughts in the convergence of local regenerative agriculture with the charitable food system, with that philanthropy, food banks and what points of leverage do you think might be important for ensuring positive social outcomes for farmers if they can participate more actively in providing food? We know that during the pandemic, so many small acreage farmers were feeding their communities when there was supply chain disruptions. So any thoughts too on like how we can record that, because that is such an important function that those growers were doing, but how do we recognize it, and how do we help them out with that? Any thoughts? That's a great question.
I can take a stab. And I guess just out of total transparency, that's not something that we have looked at right now, but I can just sort of riff on some possible intersections. And it's a really exciting question, I think, because it's thinking about how we might transition from less transactional approaches to agriculture. So I'm thinking about some of the more local farm to school programs. How could we ensure that farmers who are contributing in charitable ways can reap the benefits of the positive social outcomes are there? How could they be recognized in sort of non-monetary ways? And so I don't think I really answered that question. I probably just brought in another question to layer on top of it, but it's something that I would love to explore with you. I see that's Amanda. I would love to kind of have a side conversation about that with you.
I think one place of interest might be procurement standards for the healthcare sector and schools, like Anchors in Action is one of the progressive standards that we looked at. And yeah, I think directly tries to measure how much a farm or a supplier is providing charitable food options. And I think the more we can start to measure and make that part of a program, and we can actually ensure that they're getting the recognition for providing that service.
That's interesting, because it's not necessarily about impacting the farmer, but really how is that farmer impacting their larger community, and that work that goes unrecognized in a lot of cases. Yeah, thank you for that question, Amanda. We have another one from an anonymous attendee. They want to know are you familiar with any organizations that have already started to use the framework of the toolkit? I just want to jump in. 2 weeks ago, when we heard from Freeman Ayers Foundation, Cargill was on that webinar as well, talking about their interests. So they are stepping into the social metrics, going above and beyond American labor laws. So have you heard of any other groups that have really put their focus on these social outcomes?
I would say we've been working closely with Field to Market and Side Platformed, and I think the next step of this, now that we've sort of done the work or the initial work to name the social outcomes, I think working with organizations like you all to ensure that it's adopted. Yeah. And Michelle, if you have other thoughts.
No, so yeah, I think we're just in the process of kind of presenting this outwards into the community and beyond. So really open to suggestions or folks who are interested in kind of exploring the what's next of how do we put this into action.
It's kind of switching gears, the process of building this toolkit and all the meetings that you did, what was that like? Like, was there anything that really struck you as something that needed to be broadcast? Any anecdotes from those discussions?
Oh gosh, so many. I think really holding on to that community level impact. I think when you listen to people talk, that part is so resonant and then disappears as you start to get into quantitative, methodological feasibility. So I really wanted to make sure we hold that in our framework. I think the other piece around trust as well, I think when you approach people, asking them about standards and metrics, you think it's just going to be a straightforward, okay, these are the outcomes I want to see. But I think diving into the issues people have had with verification programs and barriers to adoption and issues with barriers to reporting and providing technical assistance to ensure small acreage farmers are brought alongside other larger farms and ranches. I think that's the part that didn't necessarily come out in the outcomes part and the metrics part, but something we also want to acknowledge that there's a lot of work to build that trust and create that bridge. People are getting left behind as we're proliferating these standards and frameworks.
Yeah, it's nice to see there's a new wave of opinion and desire for a more holistic approach, I think, to sustainability in this. Yeah, Michelle, you were going to say something, it looked like.
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to, because I wasn't the one leading this process, just from an sort of an outside perspective, it was almost really fascinating to see the folks who participated, for example, at our workshop. Natasha led sort of a working group that was gathering input for this toolkit, and the folks who were not producers were listening. And I think just watching them witness some of the challenges that are faced by producers was also really important. And that's something that we talk about a lot, that mindset shifts happen slowly, but we definitely need to create more platforms for that sort of, as you said, Natasha, building bridges for folks to see the importance of social outcomes just on a human level. When we take it to a standard or something that's written on paper, it inevitably kind of loses that identity. So I think, yeah, the process is almost as important as the outcome in this case. So I'd love to see kind of more connectivity and us think about how we can gather folks to have more listening around that, for sure.
Yep. One thing I really liked about the toolkit was, those the three kind of levels, the individual farmer, the farm, and then that larger community. And within those levels, does any low-hanging fruit jump out at you? Is there something that you think an organization or group of organizations working together could really tackle something fairly easily that, I don't know, I guess that low-hanging fruit? Did anything jump out at you?
I think definitely the things in the middle bucket at the farm level that feel like they can already sort of tie into some procurement standards and reporting mechanisms. I think things around like buyer accountability are things that external third-party verification programs can, start to pressure buyers and measure those things against, or measure against those things. I think things like economic outcomes or health outcomes at a farm level seem like things that, if you do have a baseline, you can start to assess against those things and their existing data to track that.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add, I'm not sure if this is low-hanging fruit, but just an opportunity that I see is for procurement teams or companies or even agribusinesses who are hyper-focused on addressing their Scope 3 emissions, to also consider how their programs could kind of span into other commitments that they may have, such as supplier diversity or other ED&I commitments, and kind of make that link between the fact that agriculture can kind of address those commitments that they have. simultaneously. Maybe it's a little bit of a lofty goal, but I see that's kind of, I think if we can figure out how to action that, it could have really transformational effects on the social outcomes, at least the first two levels that Natasha was talking about.
Yeah. So we have one more question. We were talking about that reporting burden. They want to know a little bit more. What do you mean by that reporting burden that prevent growers from participating in support programs? Give a little bit more detail.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, I would let a producer speak more about this, but essentially, yeah, there isn't a lot of administrative staff on a small acreage farm, and introducing a new standard or framework sometimes includes increased costs to meet those requirements, or to have to fill out a new form and require new measurement tools on the farm or the ranch. And so just the adoption of having to measure a whole new thing and create a whole new system on your farm or ranch that you're already kind of just trying to get things produced and sold, and yeah, it just adds an extra layer of complication.
This is something I've seen for my whole career. You know, I've been working with farmers for my career, and record keeping is an issue everywhere, right? I mean, some growers have, you know, farms have staff that keep those records, but can really be onerous, right? I mean, if they're, you know, even within our Fieldprint platform, you have to know, you have to have dates, you know, for all your applications. You need to know, there's a lot of things that you need to know and keep track of, right? All your fertilizer purchases and application dates, and what were your tank mixes. And there's just a lot to keep track of that. You know, I've seen a lot of farmer records in a shoebox, you know, like scribble pieces of paper. I mean, it's not like this is all just for every farm. I mean, we know that certainly some have more sophisticated systems than others, but there's a whole lot of farmers out there that are using not record keeping much at all, or we could see some modernization in some of that. And so some support, I think, too, right? Perhaps might be helpful.
Yeah, and I would just add that there is attention on this, at least in some legislative drafting of the Farm Bill, in reducing that paperwork burden for farmers and ranchers to even apply for an EQIP or a CSP program, which are the biggest cost share programs that help producers adopt new practices that are considered regenerative or conservation practices, they're called. So there is some attention, and I guess a glimmer of hope towards moving towards more efficient or streamlined application processes. But I think the key thing here is that it's an equity issue, because the smaller farms who are just making ends meet won't have the same capacity as the larger ones to actually take advantage of the programs that could help them. So that's kind of the baseline that I think of when I think of the burden that producers are facing right now.
So sharing some of that burden would be really helpful. I really appreciate how you're really looking at the whole farming system, right? We're looking across all sizes and demographics of farms for this. It's wonderful work. Thank you so much. Are there any, if there's no more questions, I mean, we have just a few more minutes left in our time together, if we want to get some questions in. And while we wait to see that, are there any last thoughts that you have, Natasha or Rochelle, before we close for the day?
Sure, I can. I'm happy to close this out, but just really grateful to you, Kelly, for reaching out to us and providing this space for us to share, and for also engaging in this dialogue. I feel I've learned a lot from you, even in this 20 minutes or so. And then thanks to the audience as well for helping us dig into some of the details. Yeah, and I would just repeat the invitation again to get involved if any of the ideas resonated, or if you have more questions for us, we are all ears.
Fantastic. Like they say, if you want to do something fast, do it alone, but if you want to go further, do it together. And so partnership and collaboration is really what this is all about. And we're really grateful for our having Forum for the Future as our great partner and colleagues. And we hope that the rest of the supply chain will join in with this effort and really start considering social aspects of sustainability as well in their supply chain programming. So thank you all so much for being here today. And we'll see you soon. Let's keep up the conversation. Let's keep up the dialogue, and hopefully we'll see everybody at the Sustainable Ag Summit in December.